What an absolutely gross weekend on the baseball diamond. Now, I got to tell you something about these Yankees and Mets right now. Jointly, I want to attack this, okay? Mm-hmm. I mean, listen, there are a lot of situations where, let's face it, as sports fans and what you and I do and what we all do here at The Fan, sometimes we rant and rave, and sometimes it's without merit. But you know what's bothering me right now? If you watch the Yanks, and I mean, the losses, obviously, but the way they're losing. The Yankees and the Mets right now, who look atrocious, they absolutely look lost, right? Nimmo last week, for some stupid reason, trying to steal second. He's out, ninth inning, game basically over. Vogelback, who, if you spot him 30 feet, couldn't win a foot race for some reason, picked off second base yesterday. And by the way, the Yankees allowing a runner to score from second on a ground ball to the infield. I'm saying all this because I know it's a long season. You're going to lose some games. What is beginning to bother me now is the lack of urgency. Forget about Cashman and Epler. They've been our target forever.
Yeah.
Can Aaron Boone and Buck Showalter show a pulse that they are not enjoying what they're seeing?
Well, I mean,
they're too docile.
Clearly, they can't be enjoying what they're seeing. I mean, the Mets are under 500, which is crazy. $379 million.
Doesn't get what you used to get, you. What it used to get, Teak.
And they're under 500. Now, here's a reason not to be panicked if you're the Mets. They're second in the division, which is crazy to think about. The Yankees, maybe they have a little bit more to worry about. That's just because the AL East is probably the best division in baseball right now, and just collectively, and it's not top heavy. It's just all the way through. There's good teams.
Yep.
And the Yankees are pulling up the rear, and the rest of the league
They're
is not
pulling up the rear, all right.
The rest of the league
they look
is
like
horrible.
ass.
But look, I think we've started to see a shift in philosophy with a couple of sports. This does not pertain to football. There's no way you can ease your way into a football season because you lose you're 0-3. Guess what? You're not making the postseason. Mm-hmm. But in baseball, just like we saw in basketball this year, some teams slow play it. They figure out like who we are, what we're going to look like, and there's so many examples. The Lakers are one. They moved away from Russell Westbrook, and they brought back Schroeder, and eventually this team kind of figured themselves out. They got healthy at the right time at the end of the season. Yes, they were in that play-in territory, but look at them now. They just blew out the Golden State Warriors, the defending champions. The Miami Heat, they lost the play-in game, and then they almost lost to the Chicago Bulls, and they just destroyed the Knicks in Game 3 of the second round.
That was gross.
We're
getting to that later.
That was
gross.
They might be broken, and I don't mean
stop.
We'll get to it. But my point is, the really good teams, Pelinka with the Lakers, and Spoelstra and Pat Riley with the Heat. You look at the Braves from a couple of years ago. Remember, they made all those moves near the deadline, and they manufactured a World Series. The same thing happened with the Phillies. They just kind of slow played it until they figured themselves out. And when they did, they made the moves that they had to make their team championship viable. And sometimes it doesn't always work out. Phillies didn't win it, but they got there. You know what I mean? So I think that the Yankees and the Mets, while it feels dire from a fan standpoint, and you're like, oh, this is gross. You're losing to the bottom dwellers in the league. At least there's still a chance for them to figure it out when it matters. And maybe that's the mindset, despite the enormous payrolls that both of these teams have.
It's honestly, it's repulsive to watch. I mean, every night is pretty gross. I mean, you can't beat the Nationals. You can't beat the Tigers. You can't beat Colorado. For the Mets' perspective, the Yankees, they can't hold the 6-0 lead when their ace is on the hill against Tampa. That's the worst loss of the season for the Yankees, and there's been a couple of them for sure. Listen, I understand what you're saying. When teams don't, especially with baseball, and this is where you want to be selective, and you want to be fair, and you want to, be fairly prudent as you dissect the baseball season because it is long. Tiki's absolutely right. But my pushback on what you just said is this. Well, You're not wrong, but now we get to the next aspect of the conversation. Well, okay, when it's time to make moves, who's making the moves? One is Billy Epler. Look at the moves he made last year. And now look at Brian Cashman and think about the conversation we've had for years now about Brian Cashman. And again, that's why it even start to, and you're not wrong, fundamentally right.
I wish I could give an intelligent retort to that. What you just said to me.
Maybe this year's different. Maybe they don't get somebody who's injured or can't play. I don't know. But I really, for the first time this season, and Buck Showalter's had some moments that have raised a few eyebrows, but we have such great respect for Buck, and he's earned it, that we haven't, jumped on him, nor should we have. I'm not saying that we jump on him now. Listen, Boone's playing with half a deck. I get that. The team's completely in tatters in terms of health. But doesn't mean that you can't project a little more urgency. I said last week, it may have been the day that you were off.
Yeah.
I make it a habit. When the Mets and the Yankees are playing well, I don't need to watch Aaron Boone and Buck Showalter press conference. When something goes awry, I dial in and I watch. I watch it on Yes and I watch it on SNY. And I listen to it and I dissect it in my own mind. And right now, what I'm hearing from the managers of the New York Yankees and the New York Mets, two guys I respect, two good baseball men, they ain't projecting what they need to project. They're messing up on the bases. The bullpen's a joke. There's not a lot of inspiration. Fundamentals are a mess, and it's unacceptable. Yeah. And they've got to speak up.
Well, the question becomes, what impact will that have? Right? It'll make us feel good. It'll sound right. From a perspective of we need the urgency as you're talking about, but what is it going to do to the clubhouse, to the locker room? Is it going to change these guys' their urgency? Is calling someone out the way to motivate them? And at this point, I think I have to trust Buck Showalter, especially Buck with the Mets. I have to trust his old school instincts on how to push the right buttons of the guys that are in that clubhouse, right? And he doesn't know all of them well, but I think they know what he's all about. And so if he was to call out Vogelback, so if he's hey, we got this kid Vogelback, he's got to start mashing, otherwise, we have no chance of winning. If he
not talking about hitting.
I know
that's
that.
important to distinguish.
But
it's a big distinction, though. It's about a lack of focus and being dialed into the fundamentals of the game. And by the way, T, I wouldn't even mention them by name. Yeah. I wouldn't single out Nimmo because Nimmo deserves respect. He plays his ass off. I wouldn't single out what he was a little bit over. I mean, stupid baseball play the other day, trying to steal second. I'm not dropping names. I'm not, calling out the Yankee infield for allowing necessarily by name, but everybody knows who you're talking about. So you just kind of, it's a broad stroke, it's a broad brush, and I'm not saying you do it to placate the fans. I'm not saying that, but I mean, if that's the case, then what the hell do they have managers for? Yeah. If they're I'm serious, like if they're so reliant on the data and the analytics behind the game of baseball, which the Yankees certainly are, Buck a little less, but they both lean on the numbers. Everybody does. If the manager's not allowed to address a lack of attention to detail, why even have a manager?
Yeah, well, I think
what's his job?
What would you want them to say? So the Yankees blow the lead. You're talking about against the Rays, and the Rays are great, man. They just figure out a way to find wins.
It's tough.
It's unbelievable how good they are, and a lot of that goes to their manager Cash. So, what would you have Aaron Boone? And what should he say?
Well,
right, because they're struggling. They're not. I mean, they're not under 500. They're still only 32 games into the season. It's not dire, right? It's not like they're in the basement of the entire American League. Yes, they are in the cellar of the East, but they're not. They're not the worst team. They're not even. They're above the halfway point.
Wait, is the bar so low? When you just said they're not the worst team, you're still talking about the New York Yankees?
Well, I'm also talking about the fact, BT, that all their power is gone. Right? It's just not there. Rizzo will bang a home run for you every now and then, like he did the other day. But Judge is out, Stanton's out, Bader's getting back. He hit another one too. So I mean, the reason that they offensively are productive is not there in the short term. It will be there in the long term. So what should Aaron Boone say?
Well, it should start. I would. It's a great question. I mean, I'm not just saying that. It really is a good question because anybody can again rant and rave, and without solution, it's really a waste of energy and airspace. What should have been done a while ago is that I thought that I thought it then, and I said it. Aaron Boone should have been more critical of Aaron Hicks. Not in a derogatory, derisive, demeaning way, but in a way that at least, let us know that if you're wearing that uniform and you're not locked in, we're not having it, man.
So it's almost like he becomes the example.
A little bit,
right?
A little bit. And you can do it with tact. I'm not saying you disrespect the guy. I don't mean that.
It's unacceptable to play this way.
Correct.
You are paid to be a professional, and 23 other guys are counting on you.
Yep.
25 other guys are counting on you.
Some of whom are young and getting a code and getting a cue from how veterans play.
Yep,
yes.
They're counting on you to be professional.
Yes.
And
yes.
What you're doing is not okay.
And by the way, Teak, if this was a one-off, like if the Yankees and the Mets, even if their seasons ended a year ago without a World Series, but there was much more production, conviction in the product. Like if the Yankees lose in 7 or 6 to the Astros and it's tightly contested and the stars hit and it just looks very different than it did.
Yeah, they're just better. You played well, they're just better.
Yeah, and same with the Mets against the Padres, where the disparity for both teams seemed incredibly big and worrisome. And that's one thing. But to me, this now represents a trickle into this season from last season. And the malaise that suffocated both teams at the end of the year last year is here again. And if you listen to the show, you're not surprised, because we thought that there was a real possibility that this could happen to either the Mets or the Yankees or both. We're not happy that it is. We're not here to pat ourselves on the back. That's not the point. We're wrong about a lot of things as well. But I think a lot of us saw this coming a mile away. The deficiencies with both teams were not properly addressed. And now my main takeaway, and again, if you don't see it this way, I get that. But my main takeaway from the weekend or the last 7, 8, 9, 10 days for both of these teams is that what the managers are projecting, it comes across as a level of acceptance to sloppy, lackluster, disjointed play. And in this city, unacceptable. That payroll or those payrolls, unacceptable. Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
$379 million for the Mets. $233 million for the Yankees. It's a lot of money to be underperforming at this level. But my retort to you is there's time. You've started to see teams slow play the early parts of their season, especially if they get injury issues early, because they know that, especially if they're willing to spend the money. We know the Mets are. Not so sure the Yankees are, but teams that are willing to fix it at the deadline, they still give themselves a chance. We've seen it in the NBA, specifically this year. And it's almost troubling because it makes the regular season insignificant in the NBA. But we've seen it in the NBA, and we've seen it historically over the last 3 or 4 years in the NL East. So we know that it can be done. It's just got to be done the right way. The assessment has to be correct.
All right. 877-337-6666. Teak, it's here to hear on the Fan inside of our Town Fair Tire studio. Our friends at Town Fair remind you that you always get the guarantee lowest price on name brand tires from Connecticut to Maine. Nobody beats Town Fair Tire. Nobody. And just a couple of weeks ago, we felt so good about things. Rangers, Gallant, you're gone. Knicks, and we'll get to the Knicks later. They looked awful on Saturday. Yankees and Mets, here we go. Hey! All of a sudden, things look very, very different. Not that they can't change.
When's football season start?
That's my boy Rogers to the rescue. All right, let's get to you. Sid's up in Riverdale. Sid, what's cooking, buddy? How are you today, pal?
What's up, Sid?
How are you guys?
Hey.
We're
good,
man.
Fantastic. As a diehard Yankee fan since the early '80s, I'm just totally disgusted. I'm at the point where I just firmly believe that this season is just going to be a total disaster, and I don't feel we're not good enough for the Yankees to make the playoffs. And what's concerning me is that at the end of the year, when we don't make the playoffs, it's just going to go down to the same thing with the general meetings. With the injuries, but there's no fixes here. And it's just like when I keep hearing these interviews, we could have done better. We could have did better. But there's no accountability anywhere.
Nope.
And everything is like, okay, we don't win a championship, but if we win 99 games, that's good enough. And for a diehard Yankee fan like myself, I missed the 90s and early 2000s. I mean, just honestly, Tierney,
yeah.
This, to me, it's just like going back to the Stump Merrill years.
Well, that's not fair, Sid. That's not fair. Listen, I know what you're saying. I really do. I appreciate the call. You can just tell that I think Sid reflects a lot of Yankee fan opinions right now. But to me, this is not even the day to bring it back to, I missed this and I missed that and I missed that. You know what? How about
stay present?
Stay present. And can you look yourself in the mirror and say, I've got a real conviction in this team that is going to change based on the internal options. And I'll tell you, Teak was all Friday. The biggest difference to me between the Yankees, and it's far more positive for me for the Mets. The biggest difference with the Yanks and the Mets is that I like Cabrera. I don't really know if he's going to hit. Mm-hmm. I like Peraza. I don't know if he can really play. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I know the Mets young kids can rake. So as soon as you actually do what you're supposed to do, get them up here, the Mets season, their profile can radically change.
Yes.
Unless Aaron Judge comes back and smashes 5 home runs a week, what's going to radically change about the Yankees? Nothing.
Well, unless they make moves at the deadline, and then Aaron Judge comes, or hopefully Aaron Judge comes back, and then they make moves at the deadline, and then Giancarlo Stanton comes back, and he's just DHing because that's the only thing we want him to do anymore. But look at this, BT. We're 35 games into the season. The Yankees have not played great. I mean, what are they over their last 10? I mean,
also played a lot of bad teams.
They have played some bad teams.
I mean, they just started to play the Rays.
But they're hurt, and they're young and other
played
places
Toronto, didn't look that good.
Because you're right, Cabrera's up, Peraza's up.
Played the Twins, didn't look that good.
Right now, they're 2.5 games out of the wild card.
I get that.
I get it. I get where the angst is, but there's also time to get this right. Now, the question is...
It's also time to get worse.
Yes.
There's a lot of time to get a lot worse.
The only question that I don't have a kickback to you is, do we trust Brian Cashman to do it right? And how to spend the money to allow him to do it right?
You know my answer.
I couldn't tell you yes or no. I know what I think would happen, which is the same as your answer.
Yeah.
But who knows? Who knows?
Oh, that's very settling. Who knows? That's where we are with the state of the baseball season. Hey, guys.
You got one team that's a game over 500. You got another team that's a game below 500. Hey, feel great after 35 games.
It's crazy, though, Teak. $650 million for a negative 7-run differential combined between the two teams. Yanks are +3, Mets are -10. Gross. Absolutely gross. 877-337-6666. So, do you disagree? Do you need more urgency? Again, we always talk about Cashman, always, and I'm not saying we can't talk about him again today on some level, but we do it all the time. We have, dove more deeply into, obviously, Billy Epler, who was much earlier in his tenure than Brian Cashman is here. But how about the managers, And there's only so many strategies you can deploy. I don't even mean that. You're not going to have 9 hit and runs. It's not Little League all of a sudden to jumpstart a team. But good God, can you react with a bit of urgency when your team kicks it all over the yard and messes up on the bases? Can you do that? I think that's fair. I really do. Tiki and Tierney on the Fan.